Can you see my screen? Yes. So good morning, everyone. My name is Luana Ladu, and I work for the TU Berlin. And I was the coordinator of one of the three projects under the BIOBASEDCERT cluster. And these are three projects. They are all they ended last year, but they are all working on. We were all working on trying to promote the use of certification schemes in the bio-based economy. Most importantly, the use of robust and effective certification schemes for the bio-based economy. I will explain more in details. Our presentation is divided in four major parts. So we start with an introduction of this tool that we developed together with the three projects. It's called the BioBaseCERT Monitoring Tool. Then we will have other three presenters that they will present the different parts of the tool. So we have the system level of the BNT, Nikola Matovic, also from TU Berlin. For the content level, we have Iris, Vural, Gursel from the Wageningen Research. And for the outcome level, we have Maulidia, Khairani from the University of Utrecht. And then we will have also a Q&A session. But if you have any question that you would like to ask during the presentation, you can write them in the chat and we will try to answer them while we are presenting. So, as I said before, the BioBaseCERT is a cluster of three Horizon projects. We all started 2022 and we ran for 36 months until 2025. And the main objective of the three projects were to assess the effectiveness and robustness of certification schemes and labels used to assess sustainability for bio-based systems. And so we were together trying to advance the bio-based economy, the sustainable bio-based economy. And the three projects are the Sustainable Bio-based project that was led by Iris, the Staff OEBS project that was led by TU Berlin, and then their Monitor project that was led by by SQ Consult, and Maulidia is here today representing one of the partners of the project. And the three projects were financed under the same call of a Horizon Cluster 6 call 2021 Zero Pollution, and was intended to promote international and EU sustainability certification schemes for bio-based systems. Within this cluster, so basically the three projects, they were all addressing the same challenges. As you know, there are many international and EU certification schemes. They've been developed and they can be applied to biological feedstock and bio-based products through these voluntary certification schemes and labels. And these are, of course, powerful instruments to assess sustainability of bio-based products. However, there is in the recent years a rapid proliferation of these schemes. And these schemes also, they have a different level of effectiveness. So it's very diversified level, and also the way they can be trusted, these schemes varies according to the scheme itself. And this is where our cluster came into play with the implementation of basically of a tool. So what we did together, the main joint output was we created a BioBaseCERT monitoring tool with the main objective of assessing the robustness, comprehensiveness, and effectiveness of existing certification schemes and labels applicable to bio-based products. And this tool that we developed, we had two major audience groups. So we were, first of all, as audience, we are targeting EU policymakers with the idea of increasing transparency on the performance of existing schemes and labels, but also to provide an understanding of how these skills can contribute to the sustainability priorities, and also to leverage the BMT to support regulatory compliance and implementation. And also another target audience for the BMT were also the owners of certification schemes and labels, because with our tool that we created, they can identify some gaps and also maybe derive some suggestion for improving the gaps. And also overall, we are trying to improve harmonization of sustainability criteria and governance among the different existing schemes. And the BMT had, we were mostly targeting industrial bio-based value chains and bio-based materials and products. So as a measure of focus or scope of the BMT, we were considering the entire value chain, capturing all the aspects of a product life cycle, including, for example, end of life and also after the end of life of the project, of the products. And as geographical scope, we consider mostly schemes and labels applicable to bio-based products produced and traded within the EU. This means also products coming from outside the EU, but traded within the EU. Our BMT tool includes, we have this structure, as you can see in this figure. We have one major component that is called a database, and the database is divided in three levels: system level, content level, and outcome level. And within the cluster, each project was responsible for one level. So the SAF VBS project was responsible for the system level. The content level was led by Sustain for Biobase, and the outcome level was led by their monitor project. Of course, for each level, each project was working, providing inputs, but the coordination was taken over by each project. And the system level is focusing mostly on the implementation of the schemes and labels more as a governance level. For example, looking at the robustness and verification procedures, how the scheme is managed, how the standards underlying the scheme is developed, and so on. So we're looking mostly at indicators like linked to robustness, governance, and credibility. While the content level was looking at principle of sustainability, so principle, criteria, and requirements that can assess key aspects of sustainability in all the areas: environmental, social, economic, and circularity aspect. So then we had the outcome level looking at the effectiveness of the schemes. For example, are these schemes really achieving the intended objective over the time? And we will go more in details to each part of this of the database of the BMT in a second. But most important, also a very important part of the tool was also the interpretation layer of the result, because we try to, of course, to provide an assessment methodology to also provide the result of the assessment based on the needs of the audience, basically. And in this process, we involve different stakeholders, also in the development of the tool, in different co-creation activities, but also different interviews, different activities, a survey to involve the stakeholders. And also we provided, of course, testing for creating the tool with schemes, existing schemes. We're going to see in a second which scheme were involved. And so it was done in a process that the final tool basically was ready at the end of the projects. Here, just to see how it works. So we started since the beginning to work together, the three projects. So we started developing, first of all, the idea behind the project, the concept of the BMT tool. And we have like a development phase that was from June 23 to February 24, the first draft of the tool. And then this first draft of the tool was tested with three existing schemes and labels: RSP, FSC, and the Nordic Eco label. And this phase went from February 24 to July 24, was the first testing phase. And this testing phase gave us a lot of input that we used to iterate, to improve the first draft of the tool. Then we had the revision process between July 24 and September 24, where we integrated all the inputs given by collected by this training with this first pilot phase. And then we have the second phase that goes from September 24 to February 25th with 6 additional schemes. So Better Biomass, ICC, SBP, EU Label, Bon Sucro, and Better Cotton. And this one went until February 25. And then we had the final version of the BMT that was ready in May 25th, when 2 of the 3 projects already ended in that month. And after this period, so what we also did, in addition to work with the BMT tool, we also created an online version of it. And the assessment of the tool includes different components. First of all, there is a pre-screening assessment that is can be used to identify the evidence, scope, and coverage, because as you know, not all the schemes are addressing the same scope, the same value chains, for example. So we try to create something that can be used to really identify which part of the BMT can be applied for the specific scheme. Then to assess the compliance of the schemes, documents with the BMT is a part that is consisted in a review of different documents, also time consuming on one side, to really understand where can we find if the indicator of the BMT is met by the scheme. We conducted also interviews to gather insight through outcome level interviews, especially for the outcome level. Then we engage the scheme owners in different meetings, starting with the kickoff meeting, but also QA session, and also other meeting with them. So we're like in continuous in meetings with the engaged schemes. And then we provide also BMT feedback through the continuous improvement. And what we did originally, we developed an Excel-based tool that included 3 separate sections. That were each of them representing a different level, and we saw that there was a lot of room for improvement, because this Excel version we require a lot of manual data entry and calculations. It was a bit time consuming and also maybe prone to errors. Then there was also maybe some room for improvement. We're looking at this Excel-based tool, may be difficult for some users to be used. So we also noticed that to conduct the assessment, to use the tool, there was a need maybe to make it more transferable to other users. So this one, what we did in this case, we together developed a user-friendly online template of the Excel-based BMT, and this one is used in this way. We try to enhance accessibility and data visualization, and also dynamic reporting, because once the assessment is conducted, the user that conduct the assessment will get a report with the results, also visualizing the results, and provides also an improved automatic scoring and processing. And there is also the option to download the assessment. So we have this online tool available in this link, and we also created a guide on how to use the tool. And there is also a video on YouTube that can be used to see how this this web-based tool by BMT works. And so this one was from our side for the introduction of the different level of the BMT. Now I'll give the floor to Nikola to present more in detail the system level. But if you have any question, please write them in the chat and we try to answer them. Nikola, I will keep sharing my screen. Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Luana. Good morning to everyone. And I have the opportunity to present the BMT system level. Next slide, please. So based on what you already heard from Luana, system level assesses the robustness of certification schemes and labels. It is actually can be considered as a backbone of the whole BMT, BIOBASEDCERT Monitoring Tool. So we each level approached with certain methodology and the concept for defining and selecting the indicators. In the case of the system level, we started with collecting all the data and information that was available out there, and we started developing a list of certain elements. So we started from the major categories, then we proceeded to principles, criteria to form, and the end, the indicators. We identified from the existing certification schemes and labels, as well as monitoring systems, certain categories and principles that we considered as the most prominent. We then compared the requirements of the selected 3 tools. That is the one that you can see here in the left lower corner. Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative, GSSI, is equal to our height, and the International Trade Center, or ITC, tool, which were considered the most robust and based on the range of criteria that we used for looking at more deep into their systems. Then we proceeded, you will see later on the next slide, how this aligns with the existing policies and guidelines. And then we validated the selected elements. Next slide, please. So you can see here the review of a variety of sources that I just mentioned. So it was not just like policies and regulations, but also certification standards and the formal standards and the existing guidelines, which was also compared to monitoring tools and benchmarks you can see on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. So how the structure of the system level looks like. So I already mentioned that we started from the top tier elements, which is category and principles. Then we went further to criterion and requirement, and you can see below just an example from one of the categories that we further integrated into the system level. So for instance, categories assurance, principles, the oversight mechanism. Then you have a description of criterion, which is kind of something that needs to be there from the side of the user, and the requirement is more explaining how the criterion can be met. Next slide, please. So we selected through the reiteration, as Luana said, like we had constant rounds of reiteration and the review and revisions with our stakeholders, also internally, but within the three consortia of our three sister projects, but also externally with the stakeholders through, for example, co-creation workshops and other events. This is the result of many of those stakeholder engagements. So we had the standard setting, which further which describes in detail how the standards should be set and in which way through consultations and the process, how it should be fair, transparent, and yeah, involving different stakeholders. Then the second one is assurance, more describing how the conformity system and assessment should be performed by either certification bodies or conformity assessment bodies, how the auditing is done, and the oversight mechanism, which was quite important in many of the literature that we consulted. The third one was traceability and claims, where we looked at traceability system, how the chain of custody models are used and in which way. And also very important is about the claims. As you know, like there is an issue with the greenwashing, and that's why it was important for us to also put out the labeling policies and what is the consequence, for example, of misuse and claims and so on. The last one was the governance and scheme management, also looking at the scheme scope and objectives, how the scheme is structured and governed, how to involve a stakeholder in the scheme, for example, management, also due diligence, very important topic, and finally, complaints and dispute resolution. Okay, next slide, please. So Luana already mentioned that the testing process was used to test the selected number of schemes and labels for the system as well as content level, which you'll hear later from Iris. We have used a kind of an Excel tool, which was like a pre-assessment tool used to check so what is applicable to the scheme in question, and whether then there was like a coverage and how the coverage for them opinion was how the principle, sorry, was covered by the scheme. Next slide, please. And when that was done, in the next step, the assessor uses the requirements that are in the scheme to see if they are met or not met, and if they are not also accessible. And they can use, for example, the justification column to better explain their decision and refer the source where the relevant information was found. Okay, next slide, please. So the testing process, for example, whether the requirement was met or not met, we had the scoring system behind it, as you can see here. If the if the requirement was fully met, then we would score the maximum amount of points. For the partially won, just 1 point. And if they weren't, if it was not met, then we would rate it, score it as a 0. And on the next slide, you will see example of the visualization of results. So all the criteria were averaged by principal, and if the principal had the percentage of points shown, then we could also see in the graphs, so for example, spider diagram on the right-hand side, how this actually looks like. And what is also important, if a principle was not applicable to a certain schemes or label, which was the case. For instance, we had eco labels that had some of the traceability, for example, principles not applicable to them, and then this would not be taken, of course, in account for the scoring. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So I would just say that some of the key insights from the system level testing with 9 selected schemes and labels was, for example, there were some requirements in the assurance mechanism, assurance principle that were set by schemes, but that were not required by the schemes themselves, but from, for example, the performance assessment body. So it depended on the mechanism, assurance mechanism of the schemes themselves. There were also some issues around auditing format and timing of field inspections that were important to be taken into account, meaning that some intricacies that are existing in the specific scheme or label that were in question were needed to be taken account. Also, what was important for the schemes was, for example, mutual agreement. That was how the schemes between themselves can have like kind of a like agreement to be, so for some mechanism like traceability can be kind of outsourced. Then the consultation with stakeholders was very important because it further explains some of the details how the scheme actually has these mechanisms in place for the stakeholder engagement. And eco labels were quite specific, so we had to change our approach because we had 2 testing rounds, and what we learned from the first testing round, we then implemented in the second one, including some specific approach for the type 1 eco labels. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so that was all from the system level. Of course, if you have questions later on, we will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Iris.
Yes, so we will move on to the content level now of the BIOBASEDCERT Monitoring Tool. So this content level is all about the comprehensiveness of the certification schemes and labels. So here we are looking at the sustainability requirements as well as the circularity aspects. So we follow this methodology as displayed in this slide. First is a state-of-the-art review of all the monitoring and benchmarking tools, standards, guidelines, policies, and relevant project outputs. Then we used all this input into defining the sustainability principles, criteria, and requirements under 4 categories. Then we established also different requirement tiers, mandatory, basic, and advanced requirements. And we also saw it's important to assign scope of these requirements. For example, what are the feedstock categories or value chain actors they're applicable to. And then we also designed an evaluation mechanism to show the assessment results. Horizontally, all through this work, we had stakeholder input and feedback for improvement. And very importantly, while we had the first draft, we used it in testing and validation with selected certification schemes. And the feedback that we got from this testing, we used in further improvement of the tool. So looking into kind of an overview of what we reviewed, so different existing monitoring tools and benchmarking tools, certification standard examples, general standards such as the ICIL guidelines, relevant policies and regulations around bioeconomy, some past and ongoing project outputs. So we used all this information and grouped our sustainability requirements under 4 categories. So we have the 3 pillars of sustainability, so environment, social, and economic. And additionally, we include the circularity as a 4th pillar, because this is very important for bio-based products to consider the circularity aspects. So you also see that under these 4 categories, we also have defined different principles, and under those criteria, and then under those requirements, and that are also categorized into different requirement tiers, mandatory, basic, and advanced, which I will explain in the following slides. So this is the overview of the sustainability principles under these 4 categories. So we try to be quite comprehensive in considering all the different environmental aspects that are relevant for bio-based product systems. And also circularity, we consider the resource use, the design and material cycling, and responsible waste management. And under social, we have also the different human rights, labor rights, safe working conditions, well-being of local community, as well as consideration for consumers. And under economic category, we have economic financial viability, fair business practice, and economic risk management. So this gives an overview of the hierarchical structure of the content level BMT, which is followed also in the system and outcome levels. What we also wanted to do is to divide the requirements in terms of different tiers. That's so that not all requirements are expected to be covered by all schemes, but only those that we identified as mandatory that we expect on. And then we distinguish between also basic requirements. So these are more prescriptive, detailed requirements that some schemes also include, but some not. And then we also include some advanced requirements. So these are more aspirational requirements that we want to drive a continuous improvement of the schemes. So this is what we expect them to adopt in future revisions. So here I also provide an example. For example, under the social category, we have the principle of labor and human rights, and there is the criteria on fair remuneration. So the requirement here, the mandatory one, is having at least a living wage. The basic requirement is related to proof of payment, and advanced requirement is having measures to limit the reduction of pay. And then before we went to the assessment, we noticed it's important to also define the scope of the assessment. Here we say, what is this requirement applicable to? Is it applicable to any feedstock category or only one of these 4 categories? So we distinguish between crops, forest biomass, agrarian and forestry residues, and wasteland residues. We wanted to distinguish between the forestry and agrarian residues from other residues because they also have consequences on soil quality. Then also looking into value chain actors, who is responsible for this requirement? Is it the biomass producer only, or is it responsibility for the whole value chain? Especially for the circularity requirements, they're generally only applicable to final product manufacturers. So to gather also insights from if all the principles are applicable to their standards or not, we define these questionnaires and send to the CSLs to get their input, which of these are applicable to them. So this is kind of a snapshot of the large Excel tool that we have for the BMT. So we have defined different requirements, and what the assessor needs to do is for each of the requirements that is defined to check the standards if this requirement is if this applicable requirement is covered by the standard, and they enter either yes or no. And if they enter yes, they also need to provide the justification of, for example, what criterion number from which standard. So also to provide the reference and the version numbers. So after filling this large Excel with all this yes, no information, and also knowing the scope of the assessment, then we can prepare such results figures, as you can see. So here what we see is that for each of the 4 categories and their principles, we have a breakdown of the results. We also distinguish between the different requirement tiers. So we deliberately did not want to make aggregated single scores, but to provide results very transparently per principle and per requirement tiers. And so here the dark blue ones show that for the requirements that were applicable for the scheme, if they are fulfilled, and blue is that this requirement was applicable for them, but it was not fulfilled, and gray ones means it was not applicable for the CSL. So then the schemes are not evaluated for those requirements. So based on these results, what we do is we make targeted recommendations. So our aim is not to make these figures and compare schemes with each other, but to make targeted recommendations for improvement for each scheme by showing points that they can further improve on. Yeah, so in result, we have also tested this content level on different schemes, and so I provided here the deliverable links in the final slide, and also we worked on a publication which is forthcoming at the moment, and you can also look into other deliverables from this project through these NADO and project websites. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Iris. Now I give the word to Maulidia for the outcome level.
Yes,
I don't see any questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Luana. So I'm going to take you through the outcome level of the BIOBASEDCERT monitoring system. So as Luana already mentioned earlier, the outcome level focus on evaluating the effectiveness and impacts of certification schemes and labels. And next slide, please. And in developing this level, we took a collaborative approach that we showed you in this slide. So it consists of 3 stepwise approach, starting with the research and literature review to identify key challenges and also essential elements for the design of the outcome level monitoring system itself. And then we move to the framework design stage, where we first define the key elements and also the scope of the methodology. And last but not least, throughout the process, we also took into consideration stakeholder feedback through internal feedback session, as well as workshop with external stakeholders. Next, please, Luna. Yeah. And in terms of the scope of the outcome level itself, so we focus on using measurable progress over time of the certification schemes and labels as our main focus. So when we talk about monitoring impacts, there are many different interpretation or approaches that can be taken. For example, in literature, it is commonly done through comparing certified companies versus non-certified companies. However, in our outcome level methodology, we place an emphasis on to what extent does a schemes and labels actually achieve their intended sustainability impacts. And for that reason, we focus on the longitudinal data that certification schemes and label owners can use to demonstrate demonstrate their impacts over time. For example, through the use of a quantitative or qualitative indicators to show their outcome or outputs. Next slide, please. And also the key elements or the foundation of the outcome level itself is based on our interview results with the scheme owners, where we basically explore what they define as impacts according to the view of certification schemes and label owners. And based on the interviews, we identify through two pathways through which these schemes and labels owner expect to create impacts. The first one is through improvement on their scheme level itself. So, for example, through continuously raise their sustainability standards over time. And a second pathway is is that the scheme and label itself brings improvement on certificate holders level. So in principle, there are three main questions that we would like to address through the implementation of the outcome level. So first of all, with regard to the scheme improvement, what we wanted to see is whether the schemes and label continuously raise its sustainability standards by taking into account the progress of certificate holders, developments in science and policy, as well as stakeholder feedback. And to what extent does this certification adoption actually lead to improved sustainability performance of its certificate holders? And then last but not least, it's to what extent does progress at scheme level actually translate into measurable sustainability progress at certificate holders? And what's also important to highlight here is that, if you can please click next, is that we also emphasize the use of evidence of measurable progress. So we wanted to see to what extent these schemes and labels owner can actually demonstrate impacts of their schemes. And next, please. And with regard to the structure of the outcome level itself, we follow a similar structure as what system and content level already presented earlier. So we start with categories. Here we have two categories of measurable progress of certificate holders and measurable progress of CSLs. We have 5 principles. And then next is we have 8 criteria and 24 requirements. I put here indicators, but it should be requirement actually. And in the next one, you can also see some example evaluation points where we, basically these are points, the points that we use to assess the schemes and labels against the framework. So, for example, in the measurable progress of certificate holders, we look into whether the schemes, for example, mandate the sustainability management plan and whether it is effective to lead to generate improvements on scheme or on certificate holders level. And on, for example, impact monitoring of own schemes, we look into quantitative assessment of sustainability outcomes and so on. And for the outcome level itself, because this field is relatively an emerging area, or like still fastly developing one compared to system and content level, our aim is to then identify gaps and encourage continuous improvement within the scheme itself. And for that reason, if you can click, please, and one more time. And for that reason, we employed 4 possible qualitative scoring. So starting with fully, when all conditions in the indicators or requirement are fully met. Partly if at least one of the condition is partly met or missing, and missing is if no evidence is found, and not applicable is if the indicator or requirement that is prescribed by the framework itself is not applicable to the condition of the schemes and labels owner. So similar principle to what system and content level have. And to just give you an example, this is an example of the outcome level assessment. So in this category, this is a category measurable progress of scheme owners and principal impact monitoring of own schemes with the criterion that you can see in this slide. And if you can click next, please. And then one more time. Yeah, so one of the indicator we have here is we ask whether the scheme quantitatively measures all at least one indicator related to climate change every year. These indicators or requirement is in principle should be applicable to all certification schemes and labels that cover principles related to climate change in their standard. And the assessor, when assessing this fulfillment against this indicator, the assessor review the documents and then elaborate the justification and as well as evidence based on their review to then provide a scoring in the fulfillment cell. And then if you can go to the next one, please. And in summary, on the left hand side, you see that these are the steps that we took during the testing. And then after finalizing the benchmarking against the requirements, we visualize the result that you can see on the right hand side. So in this visualization, what we wanted to show is that we wanted to show to what extent does a scheme actually fulfill a criterion. So you can see here that the degree of fulfillment is on a percentage level, but it basically also represents like how many requirements out of all requirements within that criterion are actually fully met or partially met or missing or not applicable. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And also, one of the elements in the outcome level is that we also look into what the schemes and labels currently monitor or are reported. And if you can click multiple times, please. Yeah. We collected this information to basically gather or to basically create a database of what is currently monitored and reported by schemes and labels owners. The goal of this exercise is also to promote cross-learning among CSLs, as I also mentioned before. The impact monitoring for certification schemes and labels owners is relatively new, so this is also an opportunity to provide cross learning among schemes and labels owners. And based on this information that we've gathered, we consolidated it into a table that you can see on the bottom right hand side here. Basically, what we did in the bottom right hand side is that we list the indicators that the schemes monitor or that the scientific evidence or the third party evidence monitor or assess. And then we see whether it is regularly monitored by schemes and label owners or whether it is regularly reported by them and whether there's a trend identified based on the efforts of scheme and label owners. And then we compare it with the data from the independent parties and whether in the end there's a consensus reached for these indicators. And then last slide for myself, from myself, I believe this is the overview of our result from the testing of the outcome level. If you can go to the next, click one more time. So what we've seen from the testing is that currently in terms of effectiveness and impacts of certification, there's a growing focus there. And we've also seen that there's already the adoption of theory of change or similar framework, which is a starting point for them to further assess and demonstrate their impacts. However, to date, the monitoring of impacts of certification schemes and labels based on the testing with the 9 CSLs, we see that it is mainly on performance monitoring, meaning that it is more showing or it is more monitoring the direct result of certification and let's say the long-term impacts that can be attributed to the intervention done or the adoption of the certification schemes and label is still relatively limited. But we also see that actually quantification of outcomes of certification is feasible, and we observe this particularly on the environmental dimension. So, for example, greenhouse gas emissions is commonly already monitored by certification schemes and labels. However, there are also still gaps in impact evaluation and monitoring. And last but not least, the demonstration of measurable progress itself is not a standalone effort by certification schemes, but it requires also collaboration with other stakeholders and also of course, investment from the schemes and label owner itself to build the infrastructure and also invest in resources that can enable the monitoring. That's the last message from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maulidia. So are there any questions? Yeah, not yet. There is, yes, one hand raised. But I don't know. I am Mona. I don't know if she can talk or she needs to write.
Hello, Mona. Please write your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box because this is a webinar, so participants are not able to talk.
Yes, you need to write the question because you don't have a, you cannot talk. You are muted. Yeah.
In the meantime, also, if anyone else has questions, also feel free to write in the chat.
You could also send us emails, of course, anytime for your questions. Okay, here. So there is a question. I distinguish between improvement at scheme level and improvement among certificate holders. How does the BMT assess the contribution of the certification scheme itself, observe sustainability improvement, particularly when regulation, market condition, or operational initiative may also influence the outcome? So I think this is from Maulidia.
Yes, I believe that question is for me, and I can answer, Luana.
Go ahead, please.
So Monica, thank you for your question. Indeed, we distinguished improvement at scheme level and improvement among certificate holders. But I'm reading your question. How does the BMT assess the contribution of the certification scheme itself to observe sustainability improvements, particularly where regulation, market condition? So for this one, to assess the contribution of certification scheme itself to observe sustainability improvements, we rely on the evidence of the impact evaluation itself. So as I mentioned before, we basically use two different data sources to assess the impacts, or to assess the fulfillment of indicators of for the scheme itself, and as the framework, we do not do the case study ourselves, but we look for evidence that actually prove that contribution. If that answer your question, so that also can be, I think that also should be keep in mind that to operationalize the impact monitoring or the outcome level of the BMT, we also depend on the availability of case study evidence.
Thank you, Maulidia. Mona, did we answer your question? You can put thumbs up. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Are there other questions?
I think that was from Monica, and then we have a question from Mona.
Yes.
Sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry. One second. The question was, sorry, there are two questions. I didn't see the second one arriving. So Monica has been answered. Okay, good. Okay, first, is the certification methodology transferable? Could it be applied to another project or vertical behind the current scope? I mean, if it's maybe certification schemes assessment could be applied. Can you maybe be more specific? What kind of like project is the project you're referring to? And is this primarily conceived as self-assessment or it is a design environment? No, it's a self-assessment for now because, of course, this was conceived within the 3 European project and now ended. And now the question is, so we found a solution to create the self-assessment tool as a way to keep it alive and to keep it like, to have the project somehow like the BMT operating still now. And of course, we are still trying to get maybe additional fundings for operating this, but currently it is only as a self-assessment tool. So scheme owners or other relevant people interested in using it can use it as a self-assessment, but they need to do the assessment themselves for now. So there is not, the project cannot conduct the assessment anymore. And for the first question, I don't know if you, Maulidia or Iris, as somebody had a suggestion, but this transferability methodology depends on to what you want to transfer it. Maybe.
But maybe just to add, we have like this Excel tool with all these requirements available. So I think it's basically easy to kind of copy this information, but hopefully with reference to this project that we worked on together, of course.
She wrote robotics, safety, and social aspects.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as Iris said, the indicators are in the system, are there. So, of course, you can apply them to other contexts. For example, the sustainability indicators, no? Yes.
Yeah.
Happy to connect offline, yeah. So you can contact Iris and for the social, but then content level part, or Maulidia for the outcome level, or ask for the system level. Yeah. Any other questions?
Please feel free to insert your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. We have our last minutes of this webinar and this session, and it was really insightful. So
I didn't check the Q&A box. Did you see if there are questions there? I just checked in the chat.
No questions so far in the
Okay,
Q&A box, just in the chat. Okay, another question from Monica.
Okay, the results suggest that quantification is currently easier for environmental outcomes than for social and economic outcomes. How does the BMT accommodate credible qualitative evidence where meaningful outcomes cannot be represented adequately through quantitative indicators? So this one is for Iris, I guess, because
I think for Maulidia.
Oh, Maulidia
right?
also, sorry.
Yeah, indeed.
Environmental, yeah, okay, Maulidia, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's indeed for me. So how does the BMT accommodate credible qualitative evidence where meaningful outcomes cannot be represented adequately through quantitative indicators? I think this is very good questions. And actually for the qualitative evidence, I mean, for quantitative evidence, we do have some sort of, let's say, a rule to determine whether how robust the result is based on the methodology that they use or the statistical test that they use, for example. But indeed, for qualitative evidence, the robustness of the result itself, I think it is not in our BMT framework. We did not design, or like we did not include a specific rule for distinguishing what is considered as a robust qualitative evidence or not. But also for that reason, we also wanted to promote this comparison between the evidence that is provided by scheme owners and also evidence provided by the third party, and we wanted to see whether consensus is reached or not. I think that's our approach in the framework.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for the question. I think it's very helpful as well for us to think for further improvement.
Mona also asked to share your contacts to reach you easily. So maybe you can share your contacts at the end of the presentation. So when we upload the materials on our website, they can easily find them.
Yes, all the emails are already in the presentation. At the end of each section, there is the emails for contact.
It's also copied now in the chat.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Iris.
So it follows system content outcome level. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, good. Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any in the chat. I don't know if in the box, but
No. Okay, so it's almost 11. So we are at the end of this insightful webinar. Thank you to our speakers and of course to our participants. Feel free to reach out our speakers also via email as they are present in the presentation that will be shared by this week. So of course stay updated also via our channels because we will publish them the updates and on our website. Okay, we can close here. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.